Welcome to the Love Doc Podcast. I'm your co-host, Raina Butcher, here with our host, Dr. Hensley.
Hello.
Hello. First and foremost, we want to thank our sponsor of this podcast, Cozy Earth, who was nice enough to send us both a pair of lovely sheets that's going to get us all cozy this fall.
They are so soft.
Are amazing. Temperature controlled.
Yes. They also are very durable. They have a 10-year guarantee on their products.
That's big.
So their sheets aren't going to pill. I spent so much money several months ago on a high-end brand of sheets, and after like 3 or 4 washes, they were rough.
The little balls?
Yeah, the little
pills. I can't
pills.
stand that either.
Yeah,
like I will literally
awful.
flip my sheet over if I start to feel those little fuzzy balls.
Yeah.
So Cozy Earth actually guarantees
Does
that
not
will
do
never
that.
happen.
Yeah.
So not to mention it's like, I can't really describe like when you get into the sheet, it's like.
It's luxurious.
It's very like you can feel the luxury for sure.
Yes.
It's made of 100% the
viscous bamboo.
Viscous bamboo.
Yeah, viscous from bamboo.
That sounds real fancy.
Yeah, it does sound fancy.
That sounds really fancy. So with promo code LOVEDOC, you can actually receive 40% off. And in addition to that, if you take the post survey after your purchase, you get a free pair of Cozy Earth socks.
I'm going to be getting some of the socks because if the socks are anywhere near as good as the sheets, I am totally in.
Yes, I love a good pair of socks too.
Yes,
me too. I'm a merino wool kind of girl. Like I love merino wool, but I would be willing to give Cozy Earth socks a shot too.
For sure.
But go check them out at cozyearth.com.
Yep, and use the code LOVEDOC for 40% off.
All right, so we are super, super excited today because we have our first guest.
Our very, very first guest. And this is someone that I have been following on TikTok for a while and slightly obsessed with. We would like to introduce Dana Doswell. Dana, you know, you are an expert in nervous system regulation, and I have learned so much from you that it's not even funny because I thought I was an expert in nervous system regulation until I started working or actually watching your content. And then I realized, you know, I am a lifelong learner and I have a lot to continue to learn. And so tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this work and, you know, how you got into studying just this really niche aspect, which is regulation of the nervous system.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, and I completely reciprocate the feeling of learning so much from you as well. And I guess I'll kind of take us back 7-ish years in my life where I think like a lot of people, I didn't even realize that I was experiencing symptoms of trauma. You know, it was this really normalized experience of what I'm now terming LLCD or low level chronic dysregulation, which was this experience of, you know, waking up in the morning and either just being on immediately, you know, reaching for a coffee, not having an appetite and feeling like almost like I was high, like there was some kind of activation that was present. And at this time in my life, I was an entrepreneur. I'd moved to Mexico. I was, for, you know, all intents and purposes, living this really amazing, incredible lifestyle and looking super successful. And then started to have all these symptoms of realizing that whenever work would be over, I would shut down. That, you know, when it was during the day and I knew I had more calls, I could do things like cook myself a meal, but it was always kind of coming from this really frantic sort of energy. And then on top of that, I had a lot of these other chronic health issues. Like I had cystic acne my whole life. I had all these skin issues. I would get sick a lot. I really couldn't handle like any kind of processed food, which, I mean, ideally we don't want to be eating that, but when you're healthy, you can have some and your body's not going to completely freak out. So this started to really, really disrupt my day-to-day. And essentially I got to a point where what I now know, I was living in a state of complete collapse. Like I went from, you know, being super wired in the mornings to waking up feeling so lethargic. And essentially I was in, you know, what we term as depression, which is actually a state of extreme physiological depletion and nervous system collapse. And I was living in a state of freeze. So at that time, you know, I tried reaching out to therapists. I tried, you know, all these different online ones, and it was mostly talk therapy. And I usually left these sessions feeling better for about 2 minutes because I'd had this huge session, but I wasn't finding that I was feeling any different. And my symptoms were still the same. And I was sitting there going, okay, something needs to change because I, you know, to be dramatic or not be dramatic, I just couldn't do it any longer.
Right.
And I was like, it was really scary. So I remember the day coming out of this therapy session and I went on Instagram and I randomly saw this term spiritual psychology. And I had this feeling in my body, and I now call these somatic breadcrumbs, where it's not, you don't think it, you feel it. And for me, I felt
Mhm.
it very much in kind of like my core of my body. And it was like that, like, you need to look into that. So that was kind of my initial foray into, holistic healing. And through just Googling spiritual psychology, I came across this video about the polyvagal theory.
Mhm.
And in 20 minutes, I felt like my entire existence had been
Mhm.
explained to me. And I realized that this was not normal, that I was actually having symptoms
Mhm.
of trauma, that I had a nervous system, that it was essentially completely disorganized and freaking
Mhm.
out. And then I just kind of had this obsession that started with like, okay, the nervous system. So like, what is that? How do I work with it? I booked my first somatic therapy session, and it was completely different than anything I'd done before. And after one session, I was like, oh my God, I feel the lower half of my body. And I didn't even realize that I had been completely numb from like the neck down
Mm,
for at least 14 years of my life.
mm,
Mhm.
And so that's what really got me started. I kind of went into this cool mix of studying evolution, psychology, somatic healing, neuroscience to a
Mhm.
degree, and then just implementing experiential learning in my own life. I did a couple of certifications, and then I've kind of mishmashed that all together to arrive to where
Mhm.
we.
Yeah, that's
that's
so
awesome.
cool. I love other people who take their own personal experience and then they just take it on a life's mission,
Mhm.
right? And that's what happened with me as well. And I had a very similar experience where I had, I talk about it a lot on my platform. My father of my children, who I was married to for a very long time, after a huge custody battle, divorce, and awful marriage, he suddenly passed away. My mom got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. A long-term relationship after my divorce ended and all of those things happened the exact same time.
Mm.
And then I had like a nervous system collapse. I actually ended up with chronic vestibular migraine. I just woke up one day with it. And from a medical model, everybody was just treating migraine as if it was just this genetic disease that we don't know why it happens. And then when I went down the rabbit hole, I was like, no, it's just a disease of an overtaxed nervous system.
Mhm.
And there's some really great people out there like Alan Gordon and Nicole Sachs, and they talk about pain and pain conditions and migraines, especially being just a collapse of the nervous system.
Mhm.
And so many different symptoms are from trauma and from a dysregulated nervous system. So I think a lot of people just don't know that they're experiencing what they're experiencing. And so I think it's really amazing that you made that connection and it's taken you on this journey. It's really, really cool.
Well, and I think it's even more amazing that we are all getting to sit here and bring more awareness to it
Right.
because for the longest time, I think we can all sit here, the three of us, and relate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody has trauma, right? But a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the physical ailments they have are as a
Yes.
result of that. And I
Yes.
didn't for a very long time.
Yes.
And so now it just makes me one when things come up in my body, instead of shaming it, which is what I would used to do, or like I would just fall apart, right? Like I'm dying, I have cancer, I have an autoimmune disease, something,
Right.
because I've struggled with gut issues, skin issues, brain fog, those sorts of things. Is that I just try to accept it now and tell my body that thank you because you're trying to teach me something here. You're trying to tell me something.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I listen to that and how do I get
Mm-hmm.
more in tune to that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the more awareness that we can bring to it, the better because people don't recognize it. People just think, "Oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
I need a pill to fix this or I need to do this to fix this," when they're not really getting to that root cause.
Right. And a lot of the clients that I have, they all have digestive issues. They all have histamine, skin issues, they all have, those types of more common trauma symptoms in their body,
Mm-hmm.
and they have never heard that those things could be from the trauma that they've experienced in their life, particularly the relational trauma
Mm-hmm.
that they've experienced. So I'm curious, what's the most impactful thing that you have learned in your journey of learning about the nervous system?
I mean, if you watch any of my content, you're not going to be surprised by my answer, which is the role of shame.
Yes.
And this was like my biggest aha moment. And I actually look back and I was talking about it in my content without
Mhm.
realizing that it was shame for a really long time. And the reason why, and I mean, if you're also familiar with any of Brene Brown's work, I think
I
she
am.
talks about
Yes.
very much, I would say, more from a cognitive perspective.
Mhm.
And I've really gotten into, like the body level of it is we, on one hand, especially I would say in the Western world. And I get also a lot of people coming into my programs that have a religious background.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole,
Mm-hmm.
intersection with aspects of religious shame, and
Mm-hmm.
even just growing up in a society,
Absolutely.
even in the healing realm, where everything is about ascending out of the human body. It's like up and out.
Mhm.
And, everyone's obsessed with the third eye and like purity and cleansing and this very kind of like implicit experience that our bodies are dirty and messy and
Mm-hmm.
dark and we shouldn't be in them. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say this is also an added level for women where like our womb and our pelvic area and, our
Yes.
periods and all of this stuff, there's so much shame surrounding it and it's very
Mhm.
in shadow and it's always vague. And so
Mm-hmm.
what ends up happening is, like the most basic level of nervous system regulation is that you're able to recognize that you need to go to the washroom and you
Mhm.
go. You're
Mhm.
able to
Mm-hmm.
recognize that you're thirsty and you drink water. You're able to recognize that someone is making
Mm-hmm.
you to move away from them and you
Right.
physically move away from them. But most people are taught to do the heart coherence meditation, the, somatic breath work as their starting point
Mm-hmm.
when they're already just in a state of complete repression of their
Right.
nervous system most basic cues
Right.
because they feel deep shame around
Right.
even having basic body needs
Right.
and
Mhm.
having a messy animal body because we've kind of forgotten that we have this primal animal physiology within us.
Mm-hmm.
Shame is so different than other emotional experiences because it hits us at the level of our identity. And
Mm-hmm.
so guilt, right, is like, I did something bad. But
Mm-hmm.
that's where, you can reach out to a friend and you're like, oh, like, I really don't like that I did this, but like, can I talk to you about it?
Mm-hmm.
Versus shame is so debilitating
Mm-hmm.
because it says, I am bad and I
Right.
am inherently deficient in
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
something. And so our entire existence
Mm-hmm.
becomes about proving to ourselves and to others that
Mm-hmm.
that deficiency doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And you
Yes.
really kind of contort yourself to try and make it seem like you're not deficient. And then your entire life essentially becomes trying to avoid experiencing shame, which
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm.
causes more shame and
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
more suppression and more
Yep.
shutdown of the body, which shame
Mm-hmm.
and nervous system collapse and depression are all
Mm-hmm.
very interlinked together.
Yep.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 1,000,000%. And what is interesting is like that's what Abraham Maslow, like in his hierarchy of needs, the reason I think he put that at the bottom is because we have to meet our physiological needs first
Mm.
so that we can survive. We can't even get past basic survival instincts, right? And to reach these other levels of safety.
Mm.
So, that when you taught me that, I was like, oh, wow. Because I am someone who will hold my pee because
Mhm.
I'm in the flow of work,
Mhm.
right? Or someone who is like, well, I'm hungry, but I got to get here,
Mm.
right? And so I didn't realize the impact of ignoring my own physiological needs and how that was affecting me. And that is something that you taught me. And it's something that I now pass on to my clients is like, no, we got to start actually one stage lower than I would normally start with clients. And that is, are you meeting your basic physiological needs? And what I found is in a lot of really busy, working women, especially,
Mhm.
they feel like they have to just power through their lives, right? They're working, they're mothers, they're, just trying to meet everybody else's needs, and then their own basic needs fall by the wayside. And then they're so dysregulated,
Mm.
right? And their relationships are impacted. And so everything is just so intertwined. And Raina and I have talked so much about shame. Both of us have
Yeah.
carried so
So
much
much.
shame,
Mhm.
and it still plays a role in our
Yeah,
lives to some
I'm
degree. We are
still
still
working.
working
I get
through.
triggered even when like I mean just, when you start talking about it, I can feel all the sensations in my body. Like I can almost feel like the tears wanting to flow, kind of like the shakiness in my chest sort of is how I would describe
Mhm.
it, and like just the overall shakiness like throughout my body when shame comes up. It's
Mhm.
just one of those things that
Mhm.
I'm still working through.
And for me, sometimes what ends up happening is, and I share this with my husband a lot, there's just these random times, and it does not seem to correlate with anything that's going on in my life, but I will just have this overwhelming sense that I'm a failure.
Mm.
And my husband will look at me and he will be like, you are the furthest thing from a failure that I could possibly ever imagine. Where is this coming from? And I literally have no answer.
Mhm.
I don't know if you have any insight. I know that wasn't one of the questions that I was going to ask you, but if you have any insight about that, it's just weird. It comes at random times.
It's actually funny that you're saying this because I was just doing some writing about this exact topic like 20
Oh,
minutes ago,
that's
pretty
so
much right
interesting.
before we started.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So something that I have really been tuning into, even from a business perspective of me, of really looking at who am I really equipped to support? Because obviously there's a spectrum of dysregulation. And what I really took a step back and looked at was that, even when I was very in this functional free state, I was very high functioning. Like, I was the VP
Mm-hmm.
of sales. I learned a second language. I was, living across Central South America. I was traveling by myself and I was doing all of that while I was very functionally frozen. And I think for me, what stands out to me from what you're saying, there are so many people, and I would say maybe even specifically women, where your intelligence and your ambition is what was reflected back to you as your main sources of value as a
Yes.
human throughout your entire
Yes.
life. And because your nervous system houses the expression of your identity, this is where you start to create this shadow self and your authentic self. And your shadow self is the repressed part of you that
Right.
says, I will actually be able to be useless and still have access to safety, love, and connection and to be
Mm-hmm.
seen as being worthy. But in your
Mm-hmm.
experience and what your nervous system internalized is, I am only worthy when I am being seen as being competent, a leader, being intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
and being ambitious. And so there ends up being this internal surveillance or hypervigilance that can be very unconscious, that is always pushing you, even when there's nobody around you,
Mm-hmm.
to be that version of yourself. So you end
Mm-hmm.
up masking even when you're alone and trying to show your own self this hyper successful version
Mm-hmm.
of you. And what
Mm-hmm.
I think is really difficult, and what I see in you and maybe myself as well, I actually believe that we are also inherently ambitious. We are
Mm-hmm.
intelligent. We do want to do
Yeah.
things in the world.
Right.
So it now becomes kind of defusing or detaching what is that inherent version of you that is real and authentic and raw, that wants to be an entrepreneur, that wants to create things,
Mm-hmm.
and which part of you is coming from trauma.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to differentiate that. And so I
Mm-hmm.
would say that when you're in those places and you're like, where the hell did this come from?
Right.
Trying to kind of tune into, okay, does this feel urgent, and does this feel shamey, and does this feel like the energy of, okay, unless I can prove to myself in this moment that I'm successful, I'm not allowed to exist.
Mm.
That's where it's coming
100%.
from trauma. So that's
100%.
what I want to reflect back to.
That's how I would describe the experience. It's
Mhm.
like I
Yeah.
have to prove somehow to someone, I don't know who that someone is, I guess
Mhm.
myself, that I am in fact a success.
Mhm.
And I think part of it is that I was in, a very, very, very abusive relationship for a very long time. And so not only did I have, childhood attachment trauma, I grew up with a father who had bipolar disorders, very dysregulated individual. He was very black and white. Like, you only got two sides of him. You got somebody who was very detached or somebody who was very angry,
Mhm.
right? And so I learned, I think, as a very young child, that if I got good grades and if I didn't like cause a lot of trouble at home, then I got my needs met, right? And there's a part of me that I think that my shadow self, I think, is like very rebellious and very like rule breaking. And like I wanted to be those people, like those kind of people that could break rules and like, I don't know. But the side of me that really shows up on a day-to-day basis is this rule follower, right? This person that's very high achieving, very rule following, always trying to do everything right, hates when I make a mistake, right? Very perfectionistic. And then it just feels like sometimes I can't hold that up.
It's interesting that you say that too, because if your shadow person is the rule breaker, I
Yeah.
think sometimes we're attracted to our shadow and other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, for sure.
And
There's evolutionary reasons for that too. And I'm
yeah,
sure Dana would talk to you about
yeah,
like trait variety and all of
because
that.
I am 100% a rule
I
breaker. I'm
know
rebellious. I'm
you are.
almost, like I like to be like there's this very edgy kind of bad side to me is what I would say.
Yeah.
Like where I like to break the rules and I find it almost fun to break the
Right.
rules. Um but then again, I think it's interesting too, and the reason why we're drawn to each other. And so Sarah and I've been best friends for about 6 years. We have a lot of the same trauma. Our
Very
time
similar traumas.
our timelines just so ironically match up in terms of the trauma, and then so many of our ailments
Are the exact same.
exactly the
Our
same.
trauma symptoms are like identical.
Identical.
Right. And so I actually, when I did all of my trauma healing work, my for the first time in my life, like my digestion was normal. Like my skin didn't have issues. Um, I had lost, when my ex-husband died, I had lost like 40% of my hair. It just like fell out. It finally kind of started growing back. And then I talk about this and I don't reveal details, but I was recently re traumatized in a very similar way about 3 months ago. And all my trauma symptoms came back like immediately.
Mm.
And so, and then I had shame around that because I am supposed to be this expert that teaches people how to heal. And the fact that during the re traumatization, I had a setback that just brought on so much more shame. And I think that the shame is what kept things in place, right? The fear and the shame, because fear and shame wire things in, right? And it wasn't until I could accept the fact that, hey, a re traumatization is what it is and it affected me. And the fact that I had a regression doesn't make me a failure,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to come out of it a lot faster, right? Whereas it took years the first time, it
Mm-hmm.
took me a couple of months to feel normal again this time. And so, one of the things I want to talk about is rumination, because one of the trauma experiences that I have is very, very severe
This is a big one I
rumination.
still struggle with as well.
So my mind, like, no, during the re-traumatization, no matter how much I wanted to stop thinking about it, it was all I could think about. And I could not distract myself from it. My brain would just loop right back to it. And I have a lot of, and so I knew, yeah, okay, this is coming from dysregulation, right? This is coming from a nervous system level. And where I feel like I am a highly intelligent person, I was trying to think my way out of it, right? Like I'm trying to think my way out of it instead of feel what I have to feel and all of that stuff. So I want you to talk about rumination. I want to learn from you about rumination because I want to be able to, one, better help myself, and two, better help my clients that really struggle with rumination, especially when they're going through a difficult relationship situation.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that you just said will kind of hook us into the initial part, which is, and maybe you've heard the saying, it's like overthinking is underfeeling. And so there's a couple of things I'm going to comment on and then give kind of some practical ways of engaging with this. So
Okay.
rumination absolutely is essentially hypervigilance, where your nervous system has latched on to an active threat. And essentially, this threat is living inside your body. And the way that your body is responding to it is through this expression of rumination or essentially obsession. And, rumination, even limerence, like these things have very similar,
Mm-hmm.
it can have a very similar experience in the body where
Mm-hmm.
like you can't get it out of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And so this brings me to the point of how do you actually work with this somatically and from the nervous system perspective?
Mm-hmm.
So, number one, as always, I always like to start with that de-shaming layer. And because what ends up happening is we already have the stress of rumination. And then now we add this judgment and this meaning of shame on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
which adds to our overall allostatic load or that
Mm-hmm.
level of
Yep.
stress burden that our body is carrying. So, layer number one, which is also, I want to say, very vulnerable, and vulnerability is, the antidote to shame. We know this,
Mm-hmm.
which is to even admit. And there's two types of vulnerability. There's self vulnerability, so admitting to yourself what it is that you're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's vulnerability through safe co regulation with someone else. So being able
Mm-hmm.
to admit what you're experiencing to somebody where you have a high degree of certainty that you will not be shamed or judged and that you will actually be accepted in whatever
Mm-hmm.
state you show up in. These
Mm-hmm.
are really important phases of admitting to yourself and being able to share this in some type of safe community, whether that's with a friend, a coach, a therapist, whatever it is. So that's kind of layer number one. And that
Mm-hmm.
automatically is going to bring you a little bit more into your body
Okay.
because now you are having less resistance and a little bit more acceptance of what is.
Right.
So here now what we want to do is we want to apply trauma-informed principles of essentially
Mm-hmm.
resensitizing your body. The way
Mm-hmm.
that I always have this visual of people that are ruminating is all of the so your body is meant to feel everything in your body. But when we don't feel safe to do
Mm-hmm.
that, all of the sensation that is supposed to be dispersed through your body gets sucked up into your head.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Most people try to release this. So we're
Mm-hmm.
like, how do we release the stress of rumination and like discharge the stress so that we can chill out? Instead, I want you to think about resourcing instead of releasing.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we're starting to do is almost like you're pulling the energy down back into your body. So, it's like, can you feel the stress of ruminating in your big left toe? Like, can you even make that kind of connection in your body? And we want to titrate this, or this idea of microdosing new sensations or even old sensations in the body, because we cannot go from 0 to 100. That's another way that we're reinforcing that trauma imprint. So we want to start by saying, okay, if right now all this tension is up here, even in your chest, can you place a hand on your chest and can you find the edge of the stressful sensation in your body and allow your awareness to sit right beside the edge of it? Almost kind of like you're approaching a scared horse. And slowly this horse is going to see, okay, you're not scared, you're not coming to attack me, you're not coming to shame me, you're actually just being with me. What happens when we feel seen and supported and we are empathizing with ourselves, this increases the amount of nervous system capacity that we have to experience and process sensation in our body. Now, we do this over and over again, and your body will naturally begin to process the stress that is causing the rumination. And you will essentially be descending lower and lower into your body until your body is actually fully resourced and able to have the quote unquote proper somatic experience of the stress or trauma that you had and naturally digest it.
Right.
So that's how I approach that.
Okay, that is so insightful.
I was
so,
entranced just then. I was like,
I know. I was like, I'm hanging on every word here
yeah.
because, and I'm starting to tear up just a little bit because the pivotal moment of when I was really able to transition out of the re-traumatization to feel, going from feeling traumatized to feeling normal, there was really a light switch moment. And that light switch moment was when I admitted to my husband how obsessed I was in my head with what was going on. And it was a scary moment because I was worried he was going to think I was crazy, right? And that he was going to become so worried about me. And there was just this night and day shift when I admitted, like, this is how awful it is for me inside of my head right now. And he was like, wow, like, how can I support you? Like, I love you. And he didn't respond with, wow, that's crazy, or you need help, or, I was so afraid he was just going to judge me, and he didn't. And when I didn't have that judgment and he was just there and loving me and like accepting me, it was a game changer. Because I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I was so obsessed with what was going on, and that literally I felt like I couldn't have any moments of refuge from it, right? And so I was using my tools, and I was progressively getting better, but I couldn't fully cross over to feeling normal again. I was having more normal days, but then I was having setbacks again. Right. And because this is what happened to me, it's very much ongoing. There's a legal consequence to what this person did to me. And so it's not just over, right? Like, I have to keep going through these processes where it keeps getting brought up and there's more phases of dealing with it. And so, but that acceptance of admission and being loved through the admission, thank you, Donald.
Yeah.
Thank you, was so enlightening and so beautiful. And so something that I teach in my coaching practice is the neurofeedback, where we allow it to start coming up into our body, and then we can experience it and we can sit with it non-judgmentally, and we can, breathe, and we can accept that those emotions are there and where they are in the body, right? And we can start to tune in. But I think you just added another layer to it, right? It's not just recognizing where it is in the body. And so I'm going to have probably a little more to add to my work.
The breakdown was so beautiful.
Pulling it down from the mind into the body, and finding where the edges
was spot on.
Yeah, and finding where the edges are, right? Of like, where is the edge of this? And can I drop it down lower? And can I bring it down lower?
Well, and the importance of co-regulation, which is another thing that you really talk about.
I talk about a lot about co-regulation.
Which I don't know if people really emphasize the importance of that, because a lot of times we just don't have the best relationships, right? And so when you don't have strong, good foundational relationships, and that co-regulation isn't part of your life, one, you just don't know what you don't know. And I didn't know that for a long time until I had a decent, wonderful partner, where I was able to, like you said, just fully immerse myself into all the things. Like, he'll even say sometimes, like, Raina, watch the diarrhea of the mouth, because he's truly my confidant, right? He's this person, the only person outside of my parents, my siblings, my best friends, that I've actually been able to go to and be like, this is what happened to me. And these are the choices I made. and I don't feel good about these choices.
Mhm.
And are you still going to love me? And he did. And
It's life
it is
changing.
very life
It's life
changing.
changing. And that's why, I think so much of my mission is to have people experience healthy love because I think there's this just bi-directional relationship where the hallmark of being securely attached is having a well-regulated nervous system. Because I teach from the lens of polyvagal theory too. When you're in the green space, when you're in the, ventral vagal space, you can, your prefrontal cortex is operating the way that it should be. You are open, you're compassionate, you're curious, you have tolerance, for difficulty, tolerance for discomfort. You are able to be connected to the present moment. You feel grounded. And when we are in a difficult spot in our relationships, we have to be able to show up that way to resolve conflict. But what's happening to all these individuals that are insecurely attached is they get into the trigger cycle and they launch straight into that trauma response, right? Which is self directed survival, self defensive responding. And so they can't be open and compassionate and empathetic because their nervous system is under threat, right? And so they launch into that trauma responding and it happens so quickly. And I get so frustrated when people are like, well, just take a step back and take a deep breath. I'm like, if they could do that, they would do that, but they can't, right? It's a capacity issue at that point. So, talk a little bit about, in terms of romantic relationships, but also in everyday life, how impactful learning to regulate your nervous system can be. Because I talk about how great it is in romantic relationships, but what about in everyday life? What does it do for you in everyday life?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before, is I think a really incredible way to understand the function of your nervous system is that your nervous system essentially works through relationship. You have a relationship with everything. You can have a relationship with an inanimate objects, right? Like you can see something that has a certain silhouette to it and it can trigger, or like you can, literally feel something so deep in your body. And what I would add to this is the flavor of the relationship that your nervous system has with something is what dictates your response to it. So I want to give like a really clear example of how this can play out in day-to-day life. So, as someone like I really like to be healthy, I like to go and work out and I like to move my body. So why is it that I could say I'm going to commit to 3 days a week for the next month and I can do it and feel good about it, and even on a hormonal level I will actually have an adaptive stress response to going to the gym, versus my friend next to me is doing the exact same thing and actually it is deteriorating her and depleting her. The flavor of her relationship with going to the gym could be fear and shame driven. So what's happening inside her body is, unless I do this, I am not worthy of having access to love, safety, and connection. And I'm deficient and there's something wrong with me and everyone's going to see it and no one's going to want me. And I'm over here like, I'm going because I want to feel better.
Right.
That is
Right.
like a very different flavor of, we both have a relationship with going to the gym, but
Right.
my nervous system is perceiving this as an expansion of health or joy in my system.
Right.
So now we start to apply this to literally anything you do, including actual relationships you have with people at work or romantic relationships. And the level that I want to bring this to, and where I see most people missing the point of building a window of tolerance to deal with having so many relationships that you have to manage, we try to avoid the messiness of being human, and we try to get to a point where we're healed enough that we feel we're like pure and clean and we bring a clean energy to everything, and we're just going to get up and go to the gym no matter what.
Right.
Or we're going to be having this perfect relationship where our partner's a mind reader and we can just never have to have difficult conversations. And so this goes back to what you were sharing about what was actually impactful for you, is to be in a relationship where vulnerability is rewarded and not punished is incredibly important. And only people who are regulated will be able to identify who people are that can provide that for them and that they can provide that for them.
Right.
So this could look like something, I'm recently started seeing somebody new, and of course, like there's stuff coming up and I'm like, we like, haven't known each other for that long. And I like wanted his favorite sweater. And he was like, okay, we just met. Like, this is literally my like prized possession. And in that moment, it was like, I knew, I'm like, that's literally totally logical. That's so okay. And internally I was like, oh my God, he doesn't want me. What the
Right.
hell? Like, he doesn't think I'm attractive. And I was like, da da da. And so in that moment, I can choose to just say there's something wrong with me. And so I'm going to just present this like perfectly regulated, that didn't impact me at all. Or I can say something like, on one hand, what you're saying makes total sense. And I just really felt in my body like that didn't feel good for some reason. And I just wanted to share that with you. And I think I kind of interpreted it in a bit of this like negative, shamey way. Having those conversations and expressing that messy, weird part of you, that is what builds real resilience.
And
And so when
intimacy.
you go out into work and
Yeah.
your boss is like saying this, like, I'm also the weirdo, or people think I'm weird. Like, I'll talk about my cycle to anyone. Like, you're asking me how I'm doing. I'm going to be on my period tomorrow, so I'm like kind of tired today.
Yeah, you're like, I'm in
Like,
my luteal
Yeah.
phase.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I think that the more we normalize that, then what we consider messy, which is actually just human, becomes normalized. That creates a felt level of safety that our nervous system just naturally picks up on. And
Right.
when that is embedded in our life and kind of at the core of the way that we're relating to other people, or to even something like going to the gym, where I can acknowledge I love feeling healthy and sometimes I really don't want to go, and that's totally normal, and I don't shame myself for that. That is when regulation really starts to give you this feeling of like this like fuck yeah energy,
Yeah.
like I know who I am. I can do stuff, like I'm not going to
Right.
do it perfectly, and that's okay. And like my center of gravity is inside my body, and I feel good about who I am, and I trust myself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, really insightful. So what about when you are undergoing like a continual trauma, like what I'm going through, or just my folks that I have one couple in mind in my head right now. Their relationship is so dysfunctional. It's so continuously traumatic. Neither of them will listen to me that this relationship needs to end. They still want to continue to try to make it work, even though it has deteriorated so far from something that is normal and healthy. What do you say to those people that are like, I have to start regulating my nervous system? I have to start to be more functional and feel better every day, even though I'm in this continual sort of traumatic experience. And, I think about relationships from my first marriage that are still ongoing, that are very uncomfortable for me because I'm connected through my children with these people, and they're related to my children, and they want to have relationships with my children, but they're not healthy people. And I try to have really strong boundaries, but I still have to have these interactions that sometimes feel traumatic and feel draining and feel uncomfortable. So, what happens? How can you start making improvements if you are in relationship with people or undergoing a trauma that is ongoing? What can people do?
Yeah, so there's three things that I want to touch on. So one, and I'll kind of go through them in more detail, is respecting your capacity. Two, building your window of tolerance for being in deeply uncomfortable situations. And three, what I call like the glimmer sandwich. So I'll kind of break them down.
Okay.
So number one is respecting your capacity. And this is something that I see a lot of, is we approach regulating with the same energy that we essentially have been traumatized with. It's like an all or nothing. So like, okay, waking up tomorrow, it doesn't matter if I'm like, seeing these people all the time. I'm just going to be regular. I'm going to do whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like on top of an already dysregulated nervous system is not going to work. And so something I have said to so many people when we start working together, I'm like, what can you take off your plate? Like if it literally is like, I've had people that are like, I'm working full time, I'm doing like an online MBA, and I'm like now starting my trauma healing journey. And I'm like, okay, like that's a lot. And you're
Yeah.
also trying to go to the gym, and you have to cook meals a day, and you're keeping your house clean. Like there's already a lot going on. So I said, and it's just really hard for someone, but I'm like, can you defer your MBA? And she had such a hard time with it. But when she did it, oh my God, she started sleeping better. She was actually able to have time for herself. Like she could cook a meal and just enjoy it instead of having to eat it in front of the computer while, like on her course. And translating this to the situation that you're in is recognizing that you will be impacted. And it is actually much more helpful for you to allow yourself to acknowledge that you will be impacted by this, and to respect that is reducing your window of capacity to deal with other stressors in your life, and actually taking this very pragmatic, practical, self-loving action to be like, okay, where are there are other responsibilities in my life right now that because this is stressing me out, I don't have the capacity to do
Mm-hmm.
unless I'm essentially now going to be so dysregulated to try and deal with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you have to recognize when you need to decrease your overall burden in your life when you are in an ongoing exposure to
Mm-hmm.
some type of traumatic situation, which of
Mm-hmm.
course has its own set of emotions with it. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
unfair. Why can't I just handle it all? And like, that's important to
Mm-hmm.
really process that as well. The second thing, like kind of what we were talking about, is building your window of tolerance to deal with this. So if you know that this is something that is going to be ongoing, what support or resources can you put in place, or even doing your own somatic work when you're outside of these situations? And, there's nuance to this of safer micro exposure to the stressor while you are in a co-regulated, safer state with
Mm-hmm.
someone else. So I almost kind of view it like you have this somatic nervous system armor when you go
Mm-hmm.
up these people, and your nervous system is able to kind of protect you a little bit more, and you don't get so enmeshed with their stress
Mm-hmm.
chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
That's number two. And then lastly, the glimmer sandwich, which is really great if you're going to go and see these people. It's going to be in this, environment, you're going to be there for a few
Mm-hmm.
hours. So what are things that bring you safety, pleasure, joy? Like for me, I love chocolate. I love chocolate chip cookies, and I love baths. So I'm like, literally, if I know I'm going to be around someone stressful, I eat a cookie before,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
go get stressed out, I come home and I eat chocolate in the bathtub.
Nice.
Sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
also watch Netflix and scroll on my phone, and I let
Mm-hmm.
myself dissociate, because I actually know
Mm-hmm.
that you can consciously use coping mechanisms when it's safer to be a little bit suppressing than it is to just be overwhelmed and re
Mm-hmm.
traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, this glimmer sandwich of consciously creating little, almost like associative rewards for yourself, of like, you did a hard thing and I know that was so hard. So, like, here's your chocolate and bath and your like fun little
Mm-hmm.
TikTok binge.
Yeah.
So, those
Mm-hmm.
are kind of three strategies that I would put in place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, that is so so helpful
Yeah.
because
And I
I
think you were
yeah
doing some of
yeah
that.
I deferred a lot when this was like the at the most intense, this recent situation. God bless you, being my best friend and being somebody who works so hard for my business. I deferred a lot to her. I said,
Mhm.
I can't do it. I cannot do it.
Mhm.
And
And I
she took a lot,
reassured you
yeah, and
that,
she was like, that's okay, I got
yeah,
you,
yeah.
and it was amazing. And then of course my husband is very supportive in terms of like the physical aspects of our family, like running the kids to different places that they need to be and stuff like that. And so a lot of people stepped in and took things off my plate, which was wonderful. But I also noticed that I've developed this habit of like in the mornings, like my mornings, I'm just cherishing them. I used to
Mhm.
just like get up and like go full blast and like get the kids to school and then go to the gym and like lift really heavy and do all these things. And I really cut back on my exercise, which is not, something I normally have ever done in my life.
Mhm.
But I had to replace it with sipping coffee and scrolling on my
Mhm.
phone
Mhm.
because that was the only way I was making it. And then, of course, the shaming part of me wanted to be like, you should be at the gym. You're going to get saggy. You're going to,
You
you're going
should
to
be
lose what you've worked
working.
hard for in
Yeah.
terms of your body. And then I was just like, no, no,
No
this
more.
is what I need to do right
This is
now.
your reward.
This is what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to enjoy my mornings
Mm.
because
And
I generally don't
the
take clients like until 11.
well, and the ongoing joke was she was like, I just need to curl up on the bed with a blanket and my
My
gummy
gummy
bears.
bears.
And
Yeah.
I was
And
like,
my
girl, do
weighted blanket
it.
and my gummy
Do
bears.
it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yes, and I did it. But I think the hallmark theme here is like the acceptance of it,
Yeah.
right? And not
Yes.
shaming
Yeah.
yourself for doing what you need to do to stay at the capacity that's going to help you continue to be functional,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because I did it the wrong way. The reason I ended up with vestibular migraine is because I was so traumatized so badly from so many things at once. And then I was trying to go 90 miles an hour to cope,
Mhm.
right? Like I was over exercising. I wasn't. And then one day I just woke up and I couldn't see and I was dizzy. And
Mhm.
I was that way for 8.5 months. And it was crazy because it was just literally like my nervous system just broke in half.
Mhm.
And I think that was my nervous system's way of saying, no, you have to rest. We're actually going to give you a physical ailment that forces you to have to lay down in the bed.
Yeah.
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 And
I
that's exactly what
100%
happened to
believe
me.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love that you said about exercise, I had the exact same experience where part of what led up to my burnout was also, lack of education around the female body, working with my cycle. And I mean, I also grew up when it was like everybody on Instagram was like a fitness model, and I got super into working out. And then it was like 5 a.m., 2-hour workouts, no matter where I was in my cycle, eating, like vegan protein shakes, which like my body does not do well with that. And just this like depletion, like trying to be like in a male's body, and it just did not work. And then what happened was when I collapsed and then I started going through the somatic healing process, I did not go to the gym for a year and a half. And I literally walked and I did intuitive movement and I did some yoga, and I healed so much. My skin healed from that. Like I had really bad acne when I was pushing myself so hard in the gym, because it was not adaptive stress at that point. It was just stress.
Right.
And then, the other thing that happened was like learning how to intuitively move my body. I started to feel the nuances of day one of my period. I should not be deadlifting. Your uterus quite literally grows 3 sizes when you're on your period. Like, and then you put all this pressure on it from weightlifting. And so I was finally able to actually get these signals from my body that, I'm ovulating. Let me literally go PR in the gym, because that feels amazing. And I almost want to just like it's like that energy.
Yeah.
Versus, it's like the inner winter, okay, like I do need to curl up. I want extra heat. And you can only feel those sensations when you slow down. And so that there's a fear of slowing down as well, right? Like it's easier to stay up, because to slow down is to feel.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's all a balance.
Right.
And then the shame piece of, okay, you can do a coping mechanism and it can actually be supportive for you if you accept it. But if you're coping and you're punishing yourself for resting,
right,
it's still not resting.
Right.
Yeah. And
Right.
my husband was so good about that, because I'm like, I need to go to the gym. Because one of the ways my husband dealt with this is like, he's always been a weightlifter, but he really poured himself into the gym. And it's actually been beneficial for him. Like he's felt stronger. He's felt like, I can do this. Right. And so like pouring more into weightlifting in the gym has been very beneficial for him. But for me, it was the opposite. I couldn't go to the gym. Like I felt, and I've instead been doing more walks. Like instead of like, I got ready and I was going to go to the gym, and then there was just something in me that says I couldn't do it. I don't want to do this. I do not want to go there, and I do not want to put my body through that right now. And so then I would just take a walk. And I've noticed like that when I accepted that, like, oh, that walk felt really good for my body.
Thanks you.
And then I had a really good day after that, but I think that if I would have gone to the gym and begrudgingly been there and been pushing myself beyond what I felt like my capacity was, the rest of the day probably would have been pretty hard on me. But the fact that I just accepted it and didn't shame myself and went on that walk and moved my body in a way that felt good to me at the time, it transformed my mood for the rest of the day. And so I think you have like a lot to say there, that really makes a lot of sense, and I can really apply that to my own situation. So how can listeners here get in touch with you? How can they find you? How can they find more of your work if what they heard today really resonates with them?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very active on TikTok. I would also say I have recently been a lot more active on Instagram, and I've been really getting into kind of like the depths of what we're talking about specifically on my Instagram stories. So if this is something that you want almost kind of like little micro digestible nervous system application on a day-to-day basis, come check out my Instagram stories. Okay. And I am now in the process. I'm going to be running a 2-part nervous system foundation series specifically for people that really resonate with this kind of high functioning, frozen nervous system state, low level chronic dysregulation, that will lead us into a longer, more intensive program if that's something that you feel interested in. And that's really where I'm going to be intersecting kind of healing from 3 types of trauma, which is attachment, developmental, and then evolutionary mismatch trauma, which is really cool. And my obsession is how do we bring the physical and emotional and somatic components of nervous system regulation together and understand that morning sunlight actually helps you regulate your emotions, and they're not totally separate things. So check that out. For those that resonate, would love to have you in that. And I think we need to connect on Instagram because
we do. I'm one of those like older millennials that like I kind of missed the Instagram. I just never get on Instagram because I don't know how to use it very well. Yeah. So she runs my entire Instagram.
But I'll definitely find you.
But I need to get more in touch with Instagram because there's so much that
There's a
is
lot.
like, really
Yeah,
great content
there's
on
a lot.
Instagram.
Well, what's your
So-
handle?
More intimate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what's your
it is.
Instagram?
It is a lot more intimate for sure.
What's your Instagram handle? How can we find you on Instagram?
Same as TikTok, at Dana Doswell.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Well, we will make sure to put that in the podcast notes
Yes.
and a link to be able to find you. So,
Yes.
Dana, I can't thank you enough.
This was awesome.
I'm obsessed with your work. I bought
awesome.
your course. I'm going through your course.
Mhm.
Continuing to be a lifelong learner because to think that you know everything is the epitome of ignorance, right? So I want to continue to learn so I can better serve my clients. And we just thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to be here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Right back at you. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
And to all our listeners, please, if you are liking and loving this content, I think this was a really, really awesome one. Please continue to tune in, like, follow, subscribe, leave a review. And until next time, peace, love, and perspective.